and welcome back to the pricing channel for small businesses. In our last video, we introduced the markdown pricing strategy and discussed an example of how that strategy can be used to maximize product or service profitability. One of the details we left out about applying the strategy is how we go about deciding when to transition from one pricing point to the next lower pricing point in order to target another customer segment. And so today we're going to talk about that topic in this video, as well as saying a little bit about how we pick the pricing points that we will use in our sequential price markdowns. So let's go ahead and get started.
And so in this presentation, we want to talk about selecting our price reduction points, both from a time standpoint as well as what those reduction points should actually be. Now, in the previous video, we illustrated with a fashion example how the markdown strategy works to maximize profitability. And for that example, we deliberately ignored the process that's used for deciding when to make the reductions from one pricing point to the next pricing point. And we did that just to simplify the example and to illustrate or emphasize how it goes about maximizing profitability. You may have also noticed that we didn't say anything about how large of a price reduction to make at each change point. So in this video, we're going to hit both of those topics. When do you go from one price point to the other? And exactly how do you select the initial price as well as the markdown points to use in the strategy? So the first question is when do we decide to mark down the prices? Well, there's 4 general techniques that you can use for choosing the timing of the markdown pricing points. Technique number 1 is just the guess. We can maybe watch sales momentum, and when it looks like one segment's sales are kind of petering out, well, we can move to the next segment. Another thing we can do is just have equal timing in each market segment. Say 2 months for the early adopters, 2 months for the value-driven segment, and then 2 months for the price-driven segment. Another technique that's a little more sophisticated is using experience. Maybe we have experience with our products or with others' products, and we just have a feel for when the price markdown point should be initiated. That experience might be just fine for the particular situation that we're in. Another technique is following the market. Some markets like the fashion industry, the automotive industry, others, you can name, they follow a script for the reductions. In the fashion industry, for example, somewhere around the 4th of July, there's going to be a reduction, a 4th of July sale. And then sometime after Labor Day, there'll be a clearance sale. It's pretty predictable in the fashion industry. Likewise, in the automotive industry, there might be a sales event in the early part of the year, and then a clearance sale in late summer, getting ready for the introduction of the new models for the fall. A fourth technique uses something that we call S-curve methodology. Now, what the heck is the S-curve? Well, the S-curve looks like this, and it can be used to determine when to make markdown points in a markdown strategy. And the way this curve comes about is starting at point 0, when we introduce our product to the market, presumably in the early adopter segment, for example, if we plot the cumulative sales of that new product versus time, we often get a curve that looks like this, and it's known as the S-curve. Sales start out slowly here. They build momentum, and then they reach a peak rate here. And then after this peak rate, they begin to decline or taper off. Okay? Now, not all S-curves will be as symmetrical as this one around the peak rate point, which is also called the inflection point of the curve. But this symmetrical curve is a good approximation for many cases. Now, what do we mean by cumulative sales? Well, let's just presume that we have a product that we're introducing into the marketplace, and we're going to track sales by week. Okay? And then we're going to add up the cumulative sales. And the way this works is, let's say in week 1, we sell 5 units of our product. Okay, at the end of week 1, the cumulative sales are 5. Let's say in week 2, we sell 7 units of product. At the end of week 2, cumulative sales are 12. And likewise, in week 3, we might sell 10 units of product. And so the cumulative sales will be 22. In week 4, we might sell 12 units of product, and now the cumulative sales are 34. In week 5, we may sell 10 units, and now cumulative sales are 44. And then in week 6, we might sell 7 units for cumulative sales of 51. And then finally in week 7, maybe we only sell 2 units, and cumulative sales are now 59. So if we do a plot of this, that's not very good. Let's try that again. If we do a plot of this, cumulative sales over time, you can see our numbers start out slow, they build up, they go through a peak, and then they start to taper off. So that's what we mean by plotting the cumulative sales against time. Okay? So now that we know how the S-curve works, we can show how we might use it for making markdown decisions. If we measure the time to hit that maximum sales point, which we also said is called the inflection point, if we measure the time from when we start selling to when we hit that maximum sales point, and then hold our price for an equivalent amount of time past the maximum sales point, we'll see that we have harvested the vast majority of the sales in that particular customer segment. So here's our S-curve again. And so what we're saying here is, in this S-curve, the time from sales start to max rate, or the inflection point in this curve, is about 2.5 units of time. So here's where we start. Here's the inflection point, and this represents about 2.5 units of time. It could be 2.5 weeks, it could be 2.5 months, whatever our basic unit of time is. And so what we're saying is, if we hold the price constant for another 2.5 units past the peak rate or the inflection point, like this, then we will have harvested the majority of sales in this particular market segment, whichever one it is. And having harvested the sales in this particular segment, now we can move to the next price point in the next segment. So if this was the early adopter segment here, The next segment we would be moving towards is the value-driven segment, and we would start all over again measuring sales and plotting cumulative sales versus time in the value-driven segment, and using this same timing methodology to decide when we'd harvested most of the sales in the value-driven segment, and then would move on to the price-driven. Now, the next topic to consider is how do we choose the price reduction points? And this, of course, actually starts with what's the initial price for the product that we're going to use. And so basically, choosing the initial pricing point and the price reduction points is a matter of market and customer knowledge. Now, in the fashion and consumer product industries, in the auto industry, and many other retail industries, they have tons and tons of market and customer data that helps them select the initial price point for what it is they're selling and what the price reduction points will be in order to target the next market segments. What they're really doing is they're focusing on the customer's willingness to pay in the early adopter segment, the value-driven segment, and the price-driven customer segment. And that's where they set their price points, at that willingness to pay in each one of those segments. Well, if we don't have the luxury, and that usually means the money, to achieve that level of market research, there's some other things that we can do. We can look at our own historical price versus demand data to get an idea of where maybe the initial price can be set to maximize sales, and we can look at maybe what some of our direct competitors have done in the way of markdown strategies to gain guidance on how we can set our markdown price points. It's not as sophisticated as using the market research, but again, if we don't have the luxury of that research, looking at our own historical demand, price versus demand data, and then looking at how our competitors handle a markdown pricing situation can give us some guidance on what we want to do.
The S-curve methodology discussed in the presentation gives us some indication of when we should move to the next price markdown point. Of course, this only works if our sales trajectory looks somewhat like the classical S-curve. Now, if our plot of cumulative sales data does not give us a very good looking S-curve, then we can fall back to watching sales momentum from the sales data that we're collecting. If our momentum begins to slow down and shows no indication of picking back up, then we may be at the point where the next price point should be selected. The other useful thing that the S-curve data can tell us is how long we are spending in each customer segment. In general, our time spent in the early adopter segment will be less than that spent in the value-driven or price-driven segments. Having this knowledge can help us when planning future markdown sales events. The last topic discussed concerns the actual price points. And the point here is, without extensive and expensive consumer research data on willingness to pay, setting our price points is a little bit of an educated guess. Determining how competitive goods are priced, especially in a markdown sales program, can help us with that educated guessing process. In our next video, which will be the last video of this series, we're going to discuss how the markdown pricing strategy is often applied to a whole wide variety of goods. So please, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down there so you don't miss that next video. And as always, we look forward to seeing you again.